Cool voiceover. Zany sound effect. We were gonna write a flashy promo about streaming us at radio.com, but considering how easy it is to do, we'll keep it simple too. Listen to The Patriot on the free radio.com app.
I felt like we could speak our minds and ideas freely and maybe even influence the opinions of listeners.
I met kids my age who share my interest in politics.
The whole experience was incredible. Speaking in the Capitol, I never thought I would do that.
These comments and others come from Minnesota high school girls who competed in the last Speaking Proudly oratory competition. Free speech deserves your help. It's time to cancel the cancel culture, which intimidates young people and stifles factual knowledge and creative thinking. Speaking Proudly encourages and inspires high school-age girls to develop their own opinions and present them clearly and convincingly. How can you help? Tell girls between 9th and 12th grade in your family, neighborhood, or classroom about Speaking Proudly and urge them to submit their application for consideration by September 11th by going to speakingproudly.org. There, they'll learn more about the process and the theme of this year's competition, October 23rd at the state capitol. Change the narrative by going to speakingproudly.org.
If you are like me, you are probably frustrated by how hard it is to get good, solid, daily Minnesota local news. The local news is dominated by far-left, agenda-driven corporate news sources that fail to cover important topics and don't give any voice to conservatives. Hi, this is Ed Morrissey of HotAir.com and a frequent host on AM 1280 The Patriot, and I have found a solution to this problem. Join me and over 100,000 Minnesota residents who read Alpha News daily. Alpha News does not run ads, nor do they have paywalls. They do provide breaking local news and insightful daily commentary. No wonder it's the fastest growing news source in Minnesota. Follow Alpha News on Facebook or follow them on Twitter at Alpha News MN. I enjoy their daily newsletters and exclusive interviews with top decision makers. Make sure you and all of your friends are informed before Election Day. Read Alpha News at alphanewsmn.com. That's alphanewsmn.com, and tell your friends.
Politics and education. It's often easier to learn what people are against than what they're for. People don't speak up for good ideas anymore. They just attack their own idea of bad ones. At Education America, we think there's a better conversation to be had, and it's a conversation about what we're for. Abraham Lincoln famously said, "The philosophy of the schoolroom in one generation will be the philosophy of government in the next." If we can ask the right questions and awaken the world around us to the truths that can shape a nation, we can see Lincoln's words come to life in amazing ways. Join my co-host Rebecca Hagstrom and myself, Mark Durkin, on Education America, Saturdays at 6 p.m. on AM 1280 The Patriot. And visit SaveTheClassroom.com for podcasts, past episodes, and other resources. Tune in on Saturdays at 6 p.m. on AM 1280 The Patriot. That's SaveTheClassroom.com. Education America, save the classroom, save the country.
Congrats to AM 1280 The Patriot for providing 2 decades of intelligent talk.
The CRT report card is supported by Alpha News, Education America, the Speaking Proudly Oratory Competition, and the Upper Midwest Law Center.
Critical race theory continues to spark heated debate in offices, school board meetings, and on social media. But why is it so polarizing? And what's really at the heart of it all? This is the CRT report card, an intelligent analysis of critical race theory and what it means for Minnesota students, educators, and parents. Recently released from detention for arguing with the teacher and general hooliganism, here's your host and moderator, Mitch Berg.
My father, the high school teacher, would be most amused to hear this. That last bit there. Not so much about what's happening in schools today. Welcome back, everyone. My name is Mitch Berg, normally heard Saturday afternoons from 1 to 3 here on AM 1280 The Patriot. If you're listening right now, this is not Sebastian Gorka. Sebastian Gorka will be back tomorrow, but it is my pleasure to spend the next 2 hours with you talking about what is, I think, could be fairly called America's great Rorschach blob, depending on who you are. Our subject for this next 2 hours, critical race theory, either doesn't exist and never existed, and you're silly to think it ever existed, Winston, or it's the absolute truth of American life and something that absolutely has to govern the way we go forward as a society, or something very different that we'll be talking about here as we go through this next 2 hours. So it's my pleasure to be joined here in the studio by 4 people that I've been dying to talk with about the subject here. To my immediate left, from Take Charge, and also the founder of Laurel Community School, Elfrida Baldwin. Elfrida, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Kendall Qualls, also from Take Charge, also known as the GOP-endorsed candidate in 2020 for the the United States Congress in the 3rd Congressional District, joins us here. Kendall, welcome back.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Mitch.
We'll come back to you in a moment here. 2 more guests here from the Center of the American Experiment, who you've no doubt heard all about on the various Salem broadcasts. Katrin Wigfall joins us. Katrin, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Great to have you. And of course, normally heard just after me every Saturday on AM 1280 The Patriot, the co-host of Education, I'm going to get this right, Education America.
That's right.
And also the founder of Liberty Classical Academy. I got that right too?
You did. Well done, Mitch.
Whoa, man. All right. First test passed. Rebecca Hagstrom joins us here. Rebecca, welcome.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us.
So we're talking about critical race theory. It's a term that's on everyone's minds here, one way or the other. I mean, everyone seems to have a stake in this issue, even if it's only denying that it exists at all. But what I'd like to do really briefly is just to go around the table here and find out what it was that drew you to the subject. What was the first you heard about it? What got you drawn into this subject enough to actually become an activist on the issue? And by way of being an activist on the issue, joining us on this broadcast today. I'll start with you, Rebecca Hagstrom.
Sure. Well, my first experience with this whole notion of there being a white way to do things and a black way to do things was back about 5 years ago when I went to an ACT conference. And I was meeting with a college counselor who said, I'm really struggling to get my black students to care about college. And I said, really? Why is that? And this counselor was black. He was from the Caribbean. And he said, because they think that going to college and being well educated is a white thing. And I said, a what? I've never heard of anything like that before. And that was my first exposure to this notion of these categories, that whites are this way and blacks are this way. And I was really baffled by it. But then slowly but surely over the course of time, I started to see more examples of this. And then it culminated with me connecting with Aaron Benner through his experience in the St. Paul Public Schools. And they had gone through the PEG training, and I'm sure we'll talk more about that later.
Oh, Nellie.
Yep. And so then suddenly their discipline practices changed, and they no longer wanted to provide discipline to the black students in their school. And when he spoke out, he got in trouble. And so he told me about what critical race theory was when we met, and I had never heard the term until he introduced it.
It was a relatively new one to me, and I'll go through my own background in this in a little bit here. But Kendall Qualls, you, African-American, successful businessman, veteran, in a just world, you would be Congressman Qualls today, but the world isn't quite that just and fair. Nonetheless, you have some background in the whole notion of coming from somewhere and getting somewhere successfully. How did you first stumble into this issue?
Well, in fact, it was one of the reasons I decided to run. When I started hearing the term systemic racism and white privilege, I thought, and I heard it from elected officials. I said, this is wrong. I mean, we used to be a very sanctioned, systemically racist country in my father's era.
Right.
He lived through the Jim Crow laws in South Carolina, and just the dehumanizing way he was treated, and many others were treated in the South.
Right.
But my life and what I lived was so much different from what he lived. And not to acknowledge it, not to understand how far we've come, trivializes what happened in the past.
And I want to talk about the reconstruction of history shortly here, but I want to make sure I get everyone's first impression because I want to come back to that.
Right.
So, Elfrida Baldwin, same question for you. How did you first get involved in this issue? How did this issue reach out and touch you in the first case?
It was 2014. I had just retired, and I think it was because I had more time on my hands. I started paying attention to the news a little more closely and ran across the same stories about Aaron Benner and St. Paul Public Schools and Pacific Education Group, and saw an article where it described some of the things they were teaching teachers about black kids. that black kids couldn't be on time for school or for class. They couldn't sit down and be quiet, that shouting out and being disruptive was black culture, and it, needed to be tolerated. And I was so offended by what I was reading. I thought, I got to figure out who this PEG is. Went to their website expecting to see some white person in a Klan's robe, and discovered that it was a black man who had founded this organization. They've been talking about CRT for 20 years. You can find it on documents on the website.
This brought up an episode. I'll have to bring that up later in the hour here because we're burning daylight here. We got to get to Catherine Wigfall from the Center of the American Experiment. Your first exposure to this issue.
Absolutely. This started back in 2017 when I started at American Experiment, and we had exposed what was going on in Edina public schools.
That's right.
And there was an high school English teacher who did a pre-AP English 10 course, and it was through PEG she was trained, and so there were references to critical race theory, identity politics, indoctrination, just all across the board, embedded in her class, embedded in training programs. And also, critical race theory was linked to the school district's path for this equity journey they described. And so that really got me thinking, too, about how these words, equity and other words, too, connect to critical race theory. And now it's personal because I will have a mixed race son, and under this ideology, he doesn't have a place when we lump people into simplistic racial groupings.
I was thinking I've not had any real first experience with this other than fairly recently. And I just, in listening to you talk, Elfrida, I realized I had an experience with this. This goes back to the mid-2000s. My kids were riding the bus to school. A young African-American girl was bullying my son, who was a shy, retiring little boy at the time. I was okay, kids are going to be kids. So I went and talked to the assistant principal. And the assistant principal, woman in charge of the discipline, said, okay, well, what's the girl? And I mentioned the girl's name. She's probably a third grader. My son was in second grade. And by the way, my daughter had kind of jumped all over because my daughter's not a shy, retiring kid, kind of a linebacker in a just world. And the assistant principal said, oh, I know that girl, young African-American girl. African-American women have a different concept of verbal aggression than the rest of us do, and we have to be sensitive to that. And I made a vow to myself long ago, never be that guy who wishes he'd said ... And I said, well, my kids' cultural tradition, being descended from Vikings, is to stand up in the longboat, wave their swords around, and pillage and loot everything in their path. Shall we be sensitive to that? And it was a bull in a china shop approach. Don't know if I would do it again, but it worked. Not on the other hand. I remember thinking at that time, so we're basically assuming that young African-American girls are going to get a pass for being, for lack of a better term, jerks to other kids on the bus. So I guess I did have an introduction bright and early to this whole concept here. A fairly trivial thing all in all, but it leads us to some much bigger issues that are going to affect your kids, not just your kids, but you at the workplace, out in society in general. We're going to talk about the tentacles that this concept is spreading throughout society when we come back. We're talking with Elfrida Baldwin, Kendall Qualls, Katrin, I'll get it right, Wigfall, and of course Rebecca Hagstrom here on AM 1280 The Patriot. The CRT report card, of course, brought to you by Alpha News and Education America. Save the classroom, save the country, and much more. We'll be back in a few minutes. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back.
Happy 20th anniversary, AM 1280, The Patriot.
Intelligent radio. AM 1280, The Patriot.
I felt like we could speak our minds and ideas freely and maybe even influence the opinions of listeners.
I met kids my age who share my interest in politics.
The whole experience was incredible. Speaking in the Capitol, I never thought I would do that.
These comments and others come from Minnesota high school girls who competed in the last Speaking Proudly oratory competition. Free speech deserves your help. It's time to cancel the cancel culture, which intimidates young people and stifles factual knowledge and creative thinking. Speaking Proudly encourages and inspires high school-age girls to develop their own opinions and present them clearly and convincingly. How can you help? Tell girls between 9th and 12th grade in your family, neighborhood, or classroom about Speaking Proudly and urge them to submit their application for consideration by September 11th by going to speakingproudly.org. There, they'll learn more about the process and the theme of this year's competition, October 23rd at the state capitol. Change the narrative by going to speakingproudly.org.
You listen every day.
I never miss it.
So now it's time for you to join the conversation.
Who, me?
Like AM 1280 The Patriot on Facebook and share your thoughts with like-minded conservatives. You can also enter to win prizes, learn about upcoming events, and more. Patriot traffic from the INeedMoreHair.com Traffic Center.
In the traffic center, westbound 94 heavy at Hiawatha to Lindale. Delays on the westbound side of 94 also at Maple Grove Parkway to Brockton Lane. Eastbound 94 disabled vehicle at Broadway. Eastbound 94 backing up after Hamlin to Marion with construction there in the left 2 lanes. Eastbound 494 packed in at 169 to France. Highway 212 to 94, 694 at 40 minutes. On the eastbound side of the crosstown, heavy at Gleason to Penn. 494 to 35W at 20 minutes. Northbound side of 35W busy at Lake. Then at County Road 88. Southbound side of 35W. Accident at Hiawatha blocking the right lane, backing up at 11th Avenue. And the northbound side of 35E slow at
Thanks for 20
Idemill.
great years. Here's to 20 more. AM 1280, The Patriot.
Welcome back, Twin Cities and World. I am not Sebastian Gorka. Maybe someday, but not yet. I am Mitch Berg. And this is the CRT Report Card special broadcast for the next hour and a half, talking with our guests on the subject of what is critical race theory. We are brought to you by the Speaking Proudly oratory competition and by our friends at the Upper Midwest Law Center. Happy to them and all of our sponsors for bringing us this show here today. So, we talked about our first exposure, our first encounter with critical race theory and some of its byproducts in our lives. Let's talk about what it is. What is critical race theory? And then we'll talk about what it's not. But let's start with you, Kendall Qualls. What is critical race theory?
Well, it's a belief system that feels that in order to correct for fairness, that certain groups have an advantage over others. And historically, that black people have been disparaged, that they've been held back, and that they're the oppressed, and there are oppressors that have historically and presently offended black people. That's the reason why we have a lot of disparities financially, academically, and everything else that we see in the public sphere.
Alfreda Baldwin, anything to add to that definition?
Just that it's the old class struggle recast with, it's in color. It used to be in black and white with, the bourgeoisie and the proletariat.
I want to come back to that, but Catherine Wigfall, your 30-second definition of critical race theory?
Well, it essentially claims that America is a systemically oppressive regime. All institutions are racist, and so any disparity that we see in racial groups is the cause of racism, and it assigns blame to groups of people for these disparities.
Now, you have been doing a series of road shows around the state about critical race theory to parents, to school boards, to audiences around the state. So you've had some practice with the elevator pitch here. We'll come back to you on that. Rebecca Hagstrom, your definition of critical race theory.
Well, I view it as really a Marxism repackaged for today. And there is this notion that the country is fundamentally racist, that really all of Western civilization is fundamentally racist. And that rather than, as Alfreda said, having the bourgeois and the proletariat, we now have the whites, Christians, capitalists that are the oppressors, which if you notice that a lot of that is Western civilization, right? The values that came out of Judeo-Christian values and capitalism. And then you have your minorities that not just in terms of race, but we also have the LGBTQ minorities. And so anyone that is viewed as a minority relative to the whites oppressors are the ones that are victims, and they can't ever seem to get out of that victimhood no matter how much they succeed, how many degrees they have, how accomplished they are. They're still viewed as victims, and whites, no matter how giving and generous and caring they may be for their fellow man, is always going to be viewed as an oppressor. And so then they want to fundamentally undo all of our institutions and remake them in this new way. It's very utopian in its viewpoint.
And I will add to that. I hear all those definitions. I want to add to this. It's the notion that the dominant class in the society has it baked into their very DNA as part of their racial identity to be oppressive. And that dominant society, the kulaks, no, I'm sorry, the Jews. No, it's white people in this case, the whiteness. I mean, there is a symbol of all evil. There's the villain in everybody's story. In this case, it's a racial identity. Whiteness is the term that's used for it. If you bring it up, by the way, Robin DiAngelo's made herself a very wealthy woman, peddling the notion. If you bring this up, you mention this, you take umbrage at the idea that you think that you were born racist and can never rise above it. Well, that's white fragility, and so that's my response to it here. And one of the things that you hear from some of the proponents of critical race theory is that, well, you can't define it. It must not exist because you can't define it. And I think we're doing a useful service here, helping people define what it is. So when they're asked around the water cooler, what is critical race theory? Being able to say, this is what it is. But it's just equally important to know what it's not. Kendall Qualls, you had a great point about this. What is CRT not?
Well, what I share with people that this is not the new civil rights movement. There's no Martin Luther King in front of this thing. I tell people, even Al Sharpton's not in front of it. It's a progressive left socialist movement.
Alfreda Baldwin, you want to add to that?
Well, I would say that what it is a very cynical use of black people. And because if you notice, they never talk about any other racial groups.
Right.
It's always white and black. And it's a very cynical use of our history to advance an agenda that is not intended to help us at all. It's destructive.
It is, and it's a common refrain for Larry Elder, one of our colleagues here at Salem. Why? I mean, just to play devil's advocate here, if I were a white progressive, I'd be saying, why would we want to do that? We're here about everyone's equality. There are historical wrongs that need to be righted here. And by the way, I want to talk about acknowledging that fact, that no sane person disagrees with that. But why would a movement dedicated toward progress cynically exploit an entire 12% of our population for those purposes, Alfreda Baldwin?
Because the people who are really driving this agenda, that's not their end game. Their end game is to destroy this country.
Catherine Wigfall. Go ahead.
Sorry, and to destroy Christianity.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Catherine Wigfall, you want to add on to that?
Yes, I would say too, it goes back to how critical race theory is defined. Right, critical race theory is not just about examining racism, and to understand this, look at its definition. Look at how Richard Delgado, who's pegged as a co-founder of CRT, has described CRT, that it's meant to question the foundations of liberal order, equality, rationalism, all of these ideas and methods that reject the goals and the aims of the civil rights movement. And it really has an activism piece as well, because the goal is to change society culturally, socially, politically, and economically, and to do so without any bloodshed, without violence.
In some ways, a rejection of everything that liberal democracy, I say that with a small L for all the conservative politicians in the House here, everything it stood for, because the civil rights movement essentially brought liberal democracy to African Americans. That was the intention. Kendall Qualls.
Absolutely the intention, and it worked. And here's the issue. A lot of the programs that the progressive left pushed in the last 50 years have been a negative impact in the black community. And again, this is one of the things they want to hide by this offense of critical race theory. In our lifetime, Mitch, We've gone from 80% two-parent families in the black community to 80% fatherless homes because of the programs they initiated and pushed in the black community. So I tell people the disparity what we're looking at is a two-parent disparity. It's not racial disparities. The only reason it looks racial is because we're 50 years ahead of where the rest of the country's going.
Yeah, and I believe it's Larry Elder makes a great point that things started 60 years ago. African American families were more likely to have two-parent homes than white families were. That has decayed drastically in the last 60 years here, and we can go into the reasons for that. But let's talk about the official response when you talk about critical race theory in public when we come back from the break. Kendall Qualls, Katrina Wigfall, Rebecca Hagstrom, and okay, well, I'll get it here, right? Alfreda Baldwin, thank you very much. And much more when we come back on the CRT report card, AM 1280, The Patriot.
Happy 20th anniversary, AM 1280, The Patriot.
Intelligent radio. Patriot traffic from the INeedMoreHair.com traffic center.
In the traffic center, westbound 94 heavy at Hiawatha to Lindale. Delays on the westbound side of 94 also at Maple Grove Parkway to Brockton Lane. Eastbound 94 disabled vehicle at Broadway. Eastbound 94 backing up after Hamlin to Marion with construction there in the left two lanes. Eastbound 494 packed in at 169 to France. Highway 212 to 94, 694 at 40 minutes. On the eastbound side of the crosstown, heavy at Gleason to Penn. 494 to 35W at 20 minutes. Northbound side of 35W busy at Lake. Then at County Road 88. Southbound side of 35W. Accident at Hiawatha blocking the right lane, backing up at 11th Avenue. And the northbound side of 35E slow at Ideville.
You're listening to our CRT Report Card special here on AM 1280 The Patriot, a special live show dedicated to delving into critical race theory. It's supported by Speaking Proudly Oratory Competition and the Upper Midwest Law Center. We'll be back at it in just a moment. The podcast will be up later, and you can look forward to a replay this Saturday from 3 to 5. So if you miss a portion of it, you can always go back and catch it or tell a friend. Tonight, we're looking at partly cloudy skies with a low in the mid-60s.
AM 1280, The Patriot.
If you are like me, you are probably frustrated by how hard it is to get good, solid, daily Minnesota local news. The local news is dominated by far-left, agenda-driven corporate news sources that fail to cover important topics and don't give any voice to conservatives. Hi, this is Ed Morrissey of HotAir.com and a frequent host on AM 1280 The Patriot, and I have found a solution to this problem. Join me and over 100,000 Minnesota residents who read Alpha News daily. Alpha News does not run ads, nor do they have paywalls. They do provide breaking local news and insightful daily commentary. No wonder it's the fastest growing news source in Minnesota. Follow Alpha News on Facebook or follow them on Twitter at AlphaNewsMN. I enjoy their daily newsletters and exclusive interviews with top decision makers. Make sure you and all of your friends are informed before Election Day. Read Alpha News at alphanewsmn.com. That's alphanewsmn.com, and tell your friends.
Politics and education. It's often easier to learn what people are against than what they're for. People don't speak up for good ideas anymore. They just attack their own idea of bad ones. At Education America, we think there's a better conversation to be had, and it's a conversation about what we're for. Abraham Lincoln famously said, "The philosophy of the schoolroom in one generation will be the philosophy of government in the next." If we can ask the right questions and awaken the world around us to the truths that can shape a nation, we can see Lincoln's words come to life in amazing ways. Join my co-host Rebecca Hagstrom and myself, Mark Durkin, on Education America, Saturdays at 6 p.m. on AM 1280 The Patriot. And visit SaveTheClassroom.com for podcasts, past episodes, and other resources. Tune in on Saturdays at 6 p.m. on AM 1280 The Patriot. That's SaveTheClassroom.com. Education America, save the classroom, save the country.
Do you want to fight back and win against Minneapolis police defunding? Against Attorney General Ellison deputizing outside climate warrior lawyers? And against Governor Walz punishing churches in his COVID shutdown orders? The Upper Midwest Law Center has fought and won these legal cases. Join them to help defend these victories and win against critical race theory in schools and employment. Learn more and make a tax-deductible donation to the Upper Midwest Law Center at umwlc.org. Join the fight.
Join the Patriot Freedom Fan Club for prizes, contests, quizzes, and more. Plus, get exclusive access to pre-sale tickets to events. It's free to join. So visit am1280thepatriot.com today.
Congrats to the Patriot for providing 2 decades of intelligent talk.
AM at 1280 The Patriot. My name Mitch Berg. Sebastian Gorka will be back tomorrow. We are here for the next hour and a half with our CRT, that's Critical Race Theory Report Card Special. I am told by highly placed sources in academia, the media, and elsewhere in education and public life that there is no such thing as critical race theory. They're just teaching American history. They're just teaching anti-racism. And saying otherwise is a symptom of white fragility. I have to say, Katrin Wigfall is following the Center of the American Experiments story this last week. An awful lot of people spent an awful lot of time going after you for talking about something that doesn't exist. Briefly, tell us a little bit about your sojourn and saga around the state, especially in Duluth last week.
Yes, we traveled to 17 cities across the state, so very rigorous schedule with all of the different stops. Spoke to thousands of Minnesotans who are concerned about CRT and how its framework is playing out in schools, and found pushback, particularly in Duluth, when the Duluth chapter of the NAACP said that we were a white supremacy organization, that we were racist, that we were coming to town to spew hate. Having never heard the presentation that Kendall and I give, and never took the time to figure out what we were actually saying, and called organized activists to call the different venues that we were planning on doing the event at, and pressured them to cancel on us.
Not just once, but
we ended up finally got our fourth stop. Our fourth venue ended up being a community event center, so it was a public space that they couldn't cancel us at.
And so for something that doesn't exist, this is pretty. They got pretty exercised about this. So
absolutely,
that kind of ties into the deflection from the deflection. I mean, you could make a case that critical race theory is a deflection from the complete failure of social policy over this last 60 years, as evidenced by what we have seen in our schools for the last 40 years, all across the board. But they don't want to, when called to account for it, they want to slip away from the subject here. They say, and the deflections I hear are, we're just teaching history, or we're just teaching anti-racism. And who could want not to teach proper history or to be anti-racist? Your response to that? Let's go to you, Kendall Qualls. Your response to that?
Well, first of all, when you start teaching things, for example, this anti-racism, that's a new concept. Was the school racist before? I mean, were people complaining because of racist behavior before? This issue again is propped up. It's being pushed down the throats of parents and down the throats of society. What we have found is what they're teaching is not anti-racism, how to treat someone else, fairly. It is really how to divide students along race against each other. Literally, that's the implementation of these programs. And is that I've had parents come to me and say, "Look, my child's coming home, and they told me that white people treat black people badly."
Elfrida Baldwin, I grew up thinking, and I grew up in rural North Dakota, but fairly liberal parents with a big L as well as a small L. And I grew up thinking not being racist was a good thing. And I was shocked to find out at a much more advanced age that being anti-racist isn't the same as not being racist. I know people in the audience are confused by the distinction. Please tell me you're not.
Well, it's nonsense.
Okay.
So if I could take a minute
Feel
here.
free.
I found a document from the Pacific Education Group for group seminars going back to 2010, where they were having seminars on critical race theory in schooling, equity, anti-racist leadership. This language is decades old,
yes,
and it has nothing to do with really addressing disparities in the way people are treated. It's poisonous concepts that just have no place in our education system or in our work space.
Yeah, and it's just to go to the language of, well, emotional abuse that frankly comes up. It's a form of gaslighting, saying it's not good, and what you think really isn't good enough. It's manipulation, it's projection, and it's the sort of stuff where if you did it to a spouse, you'd have therapists all over you, but they're doing it to all of society. So when we come back, by the way, I want to talk about some of the other things that CRT is not. And then I want to get, in the next hour, into some of the things, really the important part, what it is real people in the audience of all races, creeds, and belief systems can do as they see this creeping up around them here. This is the CRT report card brought to you by the Upper Midwest Law Center and Alpha News. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back.
AM 1280 The Patriot. Limitless access to intelligent talk. Stream AM 1280 The Patriot with our free app, your smart speaker, or with iHeart, TuneIn, and radio.com. We live in the Twin Cities, but serve worldwide.
I felt like we could speak our minds and ideas freely and maybe even influence the opinions of listeners.
I met kids my age who share my interest in politics.
The whole experience was incredible. Speaking in the Capitol, I never thought I would do that.
These comments and others come from Minnesota high school girls who competed in the last Speaking Proudly oratory competition. Free speech deserves your help. It's time to cancel the cancel culture, which intimidates young people and stifles factual knowledge and creative thinking. Speaking Proudly encourages and inspires high school-age girls to develop their own opinions and present them clearly and convincingly. How can you help? Tell girls between 9th and 12th grade in your family, neighborhood, or classroom about Speaking Proudly and urge them to submit their application for consideration by September 11th by going to speakingproudly.org. There, they'll learn more about the process and the theme of this year's competition, October 23rd at the state capitol. Change the narrative by going to speakingproudly.org.
Patriot Traffic from the INeedMoreHair.com Traffic Center.
In the traffic center, westbound 94, Fish Lake interchange to Highway 101 under 15 minutes. Eastbound 94 from 35E to 494, 694 under 10. On the eastbound side of 494 from Highway 212 to 94, 694 at a half hour. Northbound 35W Burnsville split to downtown Minneapolis at 15 minutes. Southbound 35W downtown Minneapolis to the Burnsville split at almost 20 minutes. On the northbound side of 35E from downtown St. Paul to the Forest Lake split, a 20-minute trip. Northbound 169, Highway 101 to 394 under 15 minutes. Northbound Highway 100, 494 to 94, 694 at 15.
Hey, it's Mark Levin. Happy 20th anniversary. AM 1280, The Patriot.
AM 1280, The Patriot. The CRT report card special brought to you by Education America, saving the classroom, saving the country. And speaking proudly, the oratory competition for young high school women who are looking to make a little money and speak about what is great about and what challenges this country. Preferably the real history about that. That's one of the things I want to talk about with you folks here before we get out of this hour. And that is, I was talking with my old high school history teacher last week. And he started out as pretty much a regular. He's more of a football coach, one of the most spectacularly unsuccessful football coaches in North Dakota high school history, I got to say. He kind of got a little woke along the way. He's retired from teaching, but on social media last week he said, we taught you guys the Walt Disney version of history, and it was a lot of BS there, and he's gone full-blown CRT himself in his retirement. And I had to respond to him. I said, the Ingmar Bergman version of American history isn't all that accurate here either. I mean, there's CRT, especially the notions of anti-racism and the New York Times' 1619 project, Abram Kendi's version of American history, Isabel Wilkerson's version of American history from the book Caste. I think it's fair to call it, at best, a perversion of American history, and at worst, the repetition of a lot of false memes with the intention to gaslight people of all races about the background of not just this nation, but this civilization, the most beneficial civilization in the history of the world here right now. Kendall Qualls, I know that you have had some feedback on that particular part of the issue here, the perversion of our history.
Well, absolutely. I think one of the things that we've done in our school system is remind students that the founding fathers were middle-aged white men that were slave owners.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, that's all these kids have in mind, is that they were slave owners and not much else. Yeah. And by doing that, it undermines the documents they created, the country they created, from the Declaration of Independence into the U.S. Constitution.
It ignores the actual history of that. I mean, there was a huge battle over slavery that they, to be fair, kicked down the road because you didn't want to divide the nation while you were fighting the greatest empire the world had ever known. The odds were long enough. Right? We can come back to that. But Rebecca Hagstrom, you want to do a sound off?
Yeah, I was just going to say that, teaching inaccurate history has been happening for decades now. It's actually just come to light even more through the 1619 project that really took things to the next level and placed slavery at the foundation of even why we started this country, that the Pilgrims were coming so that they could keep their slaves, which is absolutely absurd, and it's been disproven by historians on both sides of the aisle. And yet this is the story that's being told. And so I think it's really important for our parents to understand that this isn't just saying, we're trying to teach equity, which is what the schools will say. They'll say, we're just trying to teach equity. We're trying to give an honest view of history. But the reality is they are trying to change the way history is even understood, and really changing our history. And honestly, I'm just going to put a little plug in for classical education here. That's why it's so important to use original documents, because rather than using textbooks, and that's what a classical education does, because then you can't be deceived. You can read what the people of that time period were actually saying and doing.
And one of the goals is to flush a lot of this history down the memory hole. Elfrida Baldwin, you want to add to this?
Yeah, well, so you've got these 1619 project, and in response to it, Bob Woodson kicked off 1776 Unites, and it is a curriculum that focuses on the fact that, yes, there were struggles, there were things that were wrong, but Black people were able to achieve and accomplish things. And when you keep the story focused on slavery and oppression, you do a disservice to the people who survived and thrived and succeeded despite that.
Kendall Qualls.
Yeah, and just the one comment, especially about our country and the shared history that we all have from sacrifice. You know, there's no other country that actually fought a civil war to free its slaves so they can become citizens later on. And for us as a country, it was the most devastating war of all those combined leading up to the Vietnam War.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I'd like to, sorry,
Feel
can I
free.
put out one more
Yeah,
thing?
go ahead.
If you look back in time, Frederick Douglass, who was an emancipated, he actually, I think, was an escaped slave who then helped with the abolitionist movement. He was very clear that he believed in the founding documents. And now, as part of the 1619 Project, they disparage and they say, well, this was only for the whites. Only the whites saw this for the business owners, for the Christians. They didn't see this as for everybody. They didn't think everybody was equal. And yet Frederick Douglass himself said, absolutely, they did believe this, and we are now trying to carry this out to the fullest extent for all people.
So, at the very least, what they're trying to do is memory hole an awful lot of legitimate history, a lot of history that should make every American feel just a little bit proud about the background that we all share. I think that's the best you can say about this so far. The worst you can say about it, and I think you hinted at this earlier, Elfrida, is that it's sort of like the analogy I use is that bully in junior high who gets up next to you in line and starts poking at you and say, "You mad yet? You mad yet? You mad yet?" and keeps poking at you harder and harder until you do something to turn around and swing to finally lose it. And it's almost like they're trying to get a good chunk of our society to either submit to this notion or to get mad and have a big response to it. I think the term you used, Katrin, sorry, was neo-segregationism, basically trying to drive us apart again. Care to elaborate on that?
Yeah, absolutely. We see this playing out with the idea of racial affinity groups, with divided staff meetings. So Minneapolis teachers have shared with us that there was one staff meeting for staff of color, one meeting for white staff. And so you're getting people to buy into this idea that we have to be separated by skin color. And this really plays into the idea of indoctrination. Indoctrination, which uses coercive thought reform to reshape teachers' and students' attitudes, behaviors, and beliefs. You repeat something often enough, they believe it. And then we see neo-segregation in play. We see race essentialism and collective guilt. All of these have dominated the application of critical race theory and is why this theory is so concerning.
When Chicago Mayor Lori Lightfoot said she'd only talk with white reporters, I mean, she's really just the tip of an iceberg that is busting out throughout all of society, much to all of our chagrin. We have a short segment coming up, but then I want to spend the second hour of the special, talking about what parents can do, what workers can do, what listeners, citizens can do about this, because it desperately needs to be done. This is the CRT Report Card, AM 1280, The Patriot. We'll be right back.
AM 1280, The Patriot.
Politics and education. It's often easier to learn what people are against than what they're for. People don't speak up for good ideas anymore. They just attack their own idea of bad ones. At Education America, we think there's a better conversation to be had. And it's a conversation about what we're for. Abraham Lincoln famously said, "The philosophy of the schoolroom in one generation will be the philosophy of government in the next." If we can ask the right questions and awaken the world around us to the truths that can shape a nation, we can see Lincoln's words come to life in amazing ways. Join my co-host Rebecca Hagstrom and myself, Mark Durkin, on Education America, Saturdays at 6 p.m. on AM 1280 The Patriot. And visit SaveTheClassroom.com for podcasts, past episodes, and other resources. Tune in on Saturdays at 6 p.m. on AM 1280 The Patriot. That's SaveTheClassroom.com. Education America, save the classroom, save the country.
If you are like me, you are probably frustrated by how hard it is to get good, solid, daily Minnesota local news. The local news is dominated by far-left, agenda-driven corporate news sources that fail to cover important topics and don't give any voice to conservatives. Hi, this is Ed Morrissey of HotAir.com and a frequent host on AM 1280 The Patriot, and I have found a solution to this problem. Join me and over 100,000 Minnesota residents who read Alpha News daily. Alpha News does not run ads, nor do they have paywalls. They do provide breaking local news and insightful daily commentary. No wonder it's the fastest growing news source in Minnesota. Follow Alpha News on Facebook or follow them on Twitter at AlphaNewsMN. I enjoy their daily newsletters and exclusive interviews with top decision makers. Make sure you and all of your friends are informed before Election Day. Read Alpha News at alphanewsmn.com. That's alphanewsmn.com, and tell your friends.
Since 2001, AM 1280, The Patriot, intelligent radio.
AM 1280, The Patriot. Mitch Berg, the Critical Race Theory Report Card Special brought to you, and we can't thank them enough, their sponsors who make this broadcast possible. Alpha News and Education America, saving the classroom and the country. Speaking Proudly, the oratory competition that I'm proud to be a judge of, by the way, this coming October. We'll be talking about that this weekend. And the Upper Midwest Law Center. We just have a few minutes here. Let's go around the circle here and talk about what everyone is doing. Let's start with you, Rebecca Hagstrom. You are the founder of
Liberty Classical Academy.
That's the one.
There we go.
Right. The Classical Liberty Academy. Go ahead.
All right. We are a pre-K through 12th grade school. We are both classical and Christian, and we focus on grammar in the lower school, logic in the middle school, and rhetoric in the high school. And if you want to learn more about our program, you can go to libertyclassicalacademy.org. We just had our last summer open house, but we still have some limited space in our middle and high school especially.
Katrin Wigfall, you work for my former co-host, John Hinderacher, and certainly the center is no stranger to this broadcast. But what's next on you folks' agenda?
Well, following the success of our education tour, our Raise Our Standards tour, we are planning a phase 2, if you will, that will be rolling out shortly, and interested Minnesotans can stay up to date on what that'll look like and where we'll be at AmericanExperiment.org. And we're excited that it will not only provide parents with action items to push back on CRT and identity politics, but also how to connect with other like-minded Minnesotans on the issues.
Alfreda Baldwin, everyone seems to be starting schools these days. I feel a little alone here in the room. Fit the plug in here quick.
I am starting Laurel Community School. It is a K-8 Christian micro school. We're going to be using a method that's inspired by a British educator, Charlotte Mason. Living books, no textbooks.
Ooh, I would have loved that at that age. Kendall Qualls here with Take Charge. Tell us a little bit about your organization.
Yeah, Take Charge. I started at the beginning of the year in January, and we're focused on the idea that America works for everyone, regardless of skin color, regardless of social standing, that it works for everyone. We fight back against critical race theory, and I go into the black community to help return the culture to its roots of faith, family.
It's the Lord's work. We've talked about this before. We'll no doubt talk about it again. Kendall Qualls here. So when we come back in the second hour here, what I want to talk about is what parents, workers, colleagues, voters and citizens in our society can actually do about critical race theory, what options you have, and how you can and how you in fact need organize to deal with this as we go forward here. I think that's the big payoff from a special like this with any luck at all. So that's going to be coming back in the second hour here as we reconvene next hour with Kendall Qualls and Elfrida Baldwin, Rebecca Hagstrom, and Katrin Wigfall. This is the CRT Report Card Special brought to you by Alpha News, Education America, Speaking Proudly, the oratory competition, and the Upper Midwest Law Center. Go nowhere. We'll be right back.
We hold these truths to be self-evident. All men and women created by you know the thing.
AM 1280, The Patriot.
Do you want to fight back and win against Minneapolis police defunding, against Attorney General Ellison deputizing outside climate warrior lawyers, and against Governor Walz punishing churches in his COVID shutdown orders? The Upper Midwest Law Center has fought and won these legal cases. Join them to help defend these victories and win against critical race theory in schools and employment. Learn more and make a tax-deductible donation to the Upper Midwest Law Center at umwlc.org. Join the fight.
Want to enroll your child in Christian school this fall for half the cost? TwinCitiesTuitions.com has joined with area private schools to offer half-off tuition for your child's first year. At TwinCitiesTuitions.com, you'll see our partnering schools, an interactive map to find one in your area, and frequently asked questions about the program. Now more than ever, it's important for your child to have a biblical worldview. Get details about the half-off Christian tuition program at TwinCitiesTuitions.com. That's TwinCitiesTuitions.com.
AM 1280, The Patriot, WWTC, Minneapolis, St. Paul, FM 107.5, K298CO, Minneapolis. 20 years of intelligent talk.
With SRN News, I'm Keith Peters in Washington. President Biden is directing all federal employees and on-site contractors to show that they are vaccinated or otherwise submit to regular coronavirus testing.
Mr. Biden is also instructing his administration to apply similar standards to all federal government contractors. The White House says it will encourage private sector employers to follow his lead. The president asks the Defense Department to look into how and when it will mandate service members get the COVID-19 vaccine, according to the White House. The Defense Department already requires service members to get more than a dozen vaccines, including shots for measles, mumps, diphtheria, hepatitis, smallpox, and the flu. Bernie Bennett in Washington.
On Wall Street, the Dow by 153 points. The Nasdaq rose 15. The S&P advanced 18. Crude oil up $1.23 to close at $73.62 a barrel. This is SRN News.
Patriot traffic from the INeedMoreHair.com traffic center.
And the traffic center westbound side of 94 backing up at Huron at 35W, 35E to the tunnel at 20 minutes. Westbound 94 is 694 busy at Hemlock Lane to the Fish Lake interchange. Eastbound 94 disabled vehicle at Cedar. Construction causing a backup eastbound 94 at Snelling to Marion. The tunnel to 35E in a half hour. Eastbound 494 packed in at 169 to France. Highway 212 to 94, 694 at 40 minutes. On the eastbound side of 394, disabled vehicle at 169. Backing up eastbound 394 at Highway 100. Eastbound Crosstown delays at Gleason to Penn. And southbound 35W slowing at 11th Avenue. I'm Dylan. That's traffic.
20 years of intelligent radio. I'm Lee Michaels here on AM 1280 The Patriot. Thanks for being with us. Hour 2 of our CRT Report Card radio special is coming up. We had a great panel of guests as we're discussing critical race theory, what you need to know and what you can do about it. It's supported by Alpha News and the Upper Midwest Law Center. Your forecast then tonight, partly cloudy skies, a low in the mid-60s. Nice Friday, good start to the weekend with partly cloudy skies and a high around 83.
This week in the Town Hall Review with Hugh Hewitt, brought to you in partnership with the Pepperdine Graduate School of Public Policy, masks are coming back to schools.
No one within the CDC will take credit or explain their reasoning.
Join us for our program and sign up for our podcast at townhallreview.com.
Every Saturday evening at 7 and Sunday nights at 11. Here on AM 1280, The Patriot, intelligent radio. AM 1280, The Patriot.
If you are like me, you are probably frustrated by how hard it is to get good, solid, daily Minnesota local news. The local news is dominated by far-left, agenda-driven corporate news sources that fail to cover important topics and don't give any voice to conservatives. Hi, this is Ed Morrissey of HotAir.com and a frequent host on AM 1280 The Patriot, and I have found a solution to this problem. Join me and over 100,000 Minnesota residents who read Alpha News daily. Alpha News does not run ads, nor do they have paywalls. They do provide breaking local news and insightful daily commentary. No wonder it's the fastest growing news source in Minnesota. Follow Alpha News on Facebook or follow them on Twitter at Alpha News MN. I enjoy their daily newsletters and exclusive interviews with top decision makers. Make sure you and all of your friends are informed before Election Day. Read Alpha News at alphanewsmn.com. That's alphanewsmn.com, and tell your friends.
Politics and education. It's often easier to learn what people are against than what they're for. People don't speak up for good ideas anymore. They just attack their own idea of bad ones. At Education America, we think there's a better conversation to be had, and it's a conversation about what we're for. Abraham Lincoln famously said, "The philosophy of the schoolroom in one generation will be the philosophy of government in the next." If we can ask the right questions and awaken the world around us to the truths that can shape a nation, we can see Lincoln's words come to life in amazing ways. Join my co-host Rebecca Hagstrom and myself, Mark Durkin, on Education America, Saturdays at 6 p.m. on AM 1280 The Patriot. And visit SaveTheClassroom.com for podcasts, past episodes, and other resources. Tune in on Saturdays at 6 p.m. on AM 1280 The Patriot. That's SaveTheClassroom.com. Education America, save the classroom, save the country.
I felt like we could speak our minds and ideas freely and maybe even influence the opinions of listeners.
I met kids my age who share my interest in politics.
The whole experience was incredible. Speaking in the Capitol, I never thought I would do that.
These comments and others come from Minnesota high school girls who competed in the last Speaking Proudly oratory competition. Free speech deserves your help. It's time to cancel the cancel culture, which intimidates young people and stifles factual knowledge and creative thinking. Speaking Proudly encourages and inspires high school-age girls to develop their own opinions and present them clearly and convincingly. How can you help? Tell girls between 9th and 12th grade in your family, neighborhood, or classroom about Speaking Proudly and urge them to submit their application for consideration by September 11th by going to speakingproudly.org. There, they'll learn more about the process and the theme of this year's competition, October 23rd at the state capitol. Change the narrative by going to speakingproudly.org.
This hour of Larry Elder brought to you by Lifestyle Financial and Tax Advisors.
The CRT report card is supported by Alpha News, Education America, the Speaking Proudly Oratory Competition, and the Upper Midwest Law Center.
Critical race theory continues to spark heated debate in offices, school board meetings, and on social media. But why is it so polarizing? And what's really at the heart of it all? This is the CRT Report Card, an intelligent analysis of critical race theory and what it means for Minnesota students, educators, and parents. Recently released from detention for arguing with the teacher and general hooliganism, here's your host and moderator, Mitch Berg.
You know it. AM 1280 The Patriot. My name is Mitch Berg. We're in for Carl Jackson, who is in for Larry the Sage Elder this hour. Carl will be back tomorrow, of course, doing the normal afternoon show. But it is my pleasure to be sitting in today for our Critical Race Theory Report Card Special. Brought to you by, of course, our great sponsors, Alpha News, Education America, Speaking Proudly, and the Upper Midwest Law Center. Our panel of guests here this hour, as last hour, Kendall Qualls and Elfrida Baldwin from Take Charge. Rebecca Hagstrom from Educating America. Do I have that right? No.
Education America.
Education
Yes.
America. Got it. And of course, not only from the Center for the American Experiment, but also my fellow Speaking Proudly judge, Katrin Wigfall, joins us here right now. So a couple weeks ago, I took a little time and drove out to visit my sister. I visited my hometown in North Dakota. Spent some time with my dad, his lifelong teacher, his 85th birthday, guy who does not recognize the education industry anymore, but that's another whole story. And I drove out to visit my sister, my brother-in-law, and my 4 nephews and nieces in Billings, Montana, actually on a ranch just west of Billings, Montana. It's solid red Republican country. You just think, and I couldn't have been more cliched. I mean, it was the most Merca kind of vacation I could have taken. We had a big cookout. Me and the nephews and nieces went out shooting stuff out in the 50-acre backyard. It just made me proud to be an American. But after the evening's events, my sister, my brother-in-law, my older nephew got to talking, and they said, our school district, we're worried. I mean, the youngest niece, we're putting her out in a district farther out of town because Billings, Montana, is slipping into wokeism. Mm-hmm. The school board there has been lost. They can blame it on the Californians that move to town and bring their political pathologies with them. And I said, okay, what you need to do is to get involved in life in politics a little more than once every 2 years. Because, as we've all discussed, conservatives tend to look at politics like they look at ibuprofen. Mm-hmm. Something you do just when you need to because the side effects are not good for you. But in fact, CRT is not going to go away on its own, as I told my brother and sister, my sister and brother-in-law, I should say. It's going to need some pushing. It's going to need some pushing and resistance from an awful lot of good people, including the folks in this audience here. So I would like to have a discussion with our audience right now, like I had with my sister, my brother-in-law, and my nephew a couple weeks ago. What is it that people can do? I think the first thing is recognizing it. Last hour, we talked about how they're trying to go stealth on us here. The proponents of critical race theory call it everything but CRT. It's teaching history. It's teaching anti-racism. We were talking before the break, Alfreda Baldwin, about one of the major groups pushing critical race theory, pushing it since long before either of us were paying attention to this issue, a group called PEG, a Pacific Education Group. You go back with this group a ways, Alfreda. Tell us a little bit of what you know about Pacific Education Group.
Well, as I said, I discovered them in 2014 when I saw this article and read what they were saying about Black people basically being stupid and violent and whatever, and dug into it and realized they've been around for a good 20 years.
Yeah.
So they've had an opportunity to infiltrate. They had a list of school districts around the country that they were in, every state pretty much. And they have created a generation of people who have been taught by teachers who've been steeped in this craziness. And that's why we're seeing this acceleration of these ideas, because you have a whole body of people that have been turned into people who believe that this country is systemically racist and that the only way to fix things is basically to treat Black people like we're helpless victims.
And Pacific Education Group has been getting hired on as consultants at school districts all over the place. Just one of many cogs in the machine that is profiting immensely from pushing this ideology. Rebecca Hagstrom, you have some background with this.
Yes. I was just going to say, not only around the country is PEG being hired, but then we have here in Minnesota, Equity Alliance. They have been hired by, I believe, 7 school districts across the Twin Cities. White Bear Lake, Forest Lake, Roseville, Apple Valley are at least 4 of them that I know of. And what I do think is really important for people to understand is that they need to get involved early. I know the Centennial School District has started their own parent group trying to prevent that school district from hiring Equity Alliance. But you need to be involved to understand what it is that these groups are doing, because it's not just within history class. this is critical race theory from a school standpoint affects even the grading, how they're going to grade. There is equity grading that they often implement once they've contracted with these organizations. There's equity discipline, which we referenced earlier. It even affects learning specialists. So they don't want a disproportionate number of minority students being represented in the learning specialist realm. So they will then literally remove the help and mainstream these kids who really need help, just simply so that they can say they have equal numbers. So parents need to be really looking into these organizations like PEG and Equity Alliance, and I know that there's many others out there too.
It's becoming a big part of the education industrial complex. And of course, PEG has made a lot of headlines here in the Twin Cities when I believe the Center of the American Experience got involved when they took over the contract of getting the Edina School District right, Katrin Wigfall. You go a ways back with the issue as far as that goes. Again, just one of many, but the effect they had as just one agent of this change in the Edina School District was so dramatic and so jarring for a district that had always prided itself on a great education for everyone.
Absolutely. And it affects students' academic success. You know, when we talk about equity and often supporters of it it's defined a bunch of different ways, right? And so it's hard to get at what equity truly means. Equity means equality of outcomes, which only happens when you favor one group over another. But I think, too, a lot of school districts using this picture of students trying to see over a fence and needing to stand on different boxes to see over the fence, and that's what equity is, because equality would only give everyone the same. Equity gives students what they need. But again, how is this playing out? And I would pose the question to schools, okay, so if your goal toward equity is so genuine, what does that look like? How does that play out in students' academic success? Because those boxes don't appear to be working, as too many students still can't read and write at grade level.
Kendall Qualls.
Yeah. So how does this plays out for parents? So what can they do? What I've been doing and speaking across the state and across the country is we've been living off the fumes. I call it the fumes of our grandparents, the blessings and the sacrifices that they've given us today, without much effort for our own freedoms. It's time for us in this generation to get involved in civic behavior. That's running for school board, running for city council, getting involved. And if they can't run, support someone that is. Find a good candidate. We have templates to help people get involved and to win. I've spoken in Dallas, Texas, and there's a group there that they ran just on critical race theory alone. They replaced 2 school board members and the mayor with a 40-point margin.
That is amazing. And when we come back from this next break in just a moment here, I would love to talk about some of this involvement that we're talking about here, the effect that this can have, because we're seeing it in the news all over the place. I mean, Laurel, Virginia has been the big headline in recent weeks here, where parents in what could be fairly called a fairly safe blue district have had enough and they don't want to take it anymore. And I have a hunch that as more parents in this audience that we're talking to right now learn more about this, especially more reliable information about this from people who are actually paying attention, that's you all, that there's going to be some more of this, shall we say, upset to channel in the right direction. So I'd like to, when we come back, talk a little bit about what the right direction is and how we can get people to channel some of that energy that people are starting to feel and the imperative they're starting to see to, push back on this here. So we'll be doing that when we come back here. And by the way, this is the CRT Report Card, AM 1280 The Patriot, brought to you by Alpha News, Education America, Speaking Proudly, and the Upper Midwest Law Center. Go nowhere. We'll be right back.
Congratulations on 20 years of keeping the Twin Cities right.
AM 1280, The Patriot. AM 1280, The Patriot.
Do you want to fight back and win against Minneapolis police defunding? Against Attorney General Ellison deputizing outside climate warrior lawyers? And against Governor Walz punishing churches in his COVID shutdown orders? The Upper Midwest Law Center has fought and won these legal cases. Join them to help defend these victories and win against critical race theory in schools and employment. Learn more and make a tax-deductible donation to the Upper Midwest Law Center at umwlc.org. Join the fight.
Are you the principal or leader of a Christian or Catholic school? Would you like to fill the empty seats in your classrooms for no cash out of pocket? TwinCitiesTuitions.com would like to team up with you on our tuition program for first-year students. You'll be part of a marketing campaign to raise awareness about your school and gain new students for next year and beyond. Again, at no cash investment for your school. Get details by logging on to TwinCitiesTuitions.com. That's TwinCitiesTuitions.com.
Thanks for 20 great years. Here's to 20 more. AM 1280, The Patriot. Patriot traffic from the IneedMoreHair.com Traffic Center.
And the Traffic Center westbound side of 94 backing up at Huron at 35W, 35E to the tunnel at 20 minutes. Westbound 94, 694 busy at Hemlock Lane to the Fish Lake interchange. Eastbound 94, disabled vehicle at Cedar. Construction causing a backup eastbound 94 at Snelling to Marion. The tunnel to 35E at a half hour. Eastbound 494 packed in at 169 to France. Highway 212 to 94, 694 at 40 minutes. On the eastbound side of 394, disabled vehicle at 169. Backing up eastbound 394 at Highway 100. Eastbound Crosstown delays at Gleason to Penn. And southbound 35W slowing at 11th Avenue. I'm Dylan. That's traffic.
1280, The Patriot. The right station for 20 years.
AM 1280, The Patriot. My name is Mitch Berg. This is the CRT Report Card Special. And I'm going to cut straight to it here. We want to start talking about things that parents can do, that people can do, because it's not just students anymore, but I want to focus on them for a bit here. But the education industrial complex is a big part of the issue here. And, of course, a key part of that, where education and politics come together, is the teachers' union, who have become one of the major pushers, if you will, of CRT. Katrin Wigfall, I believe you wanted to mention that briefly here.
Absolutely. The argument that CRT is not in K-12 public schools, that argument is dead, right? And the National Teachers Union has proved that through the new business item that they have passed this summer, that is everything CRT, and that wants to push CRT in all public schools across the country. So supporters of CRT can no longer say that it's not in K-12 schools. It absolutely is, and there are efforts to have it play a larger role in our classrooms.
Am I the show of hands? Anybody but me surprised that they would even try and deny it's in K-12 schools? You can't see it on the radio, but there are a bunch of hands here in the studio here. So let's talk about what people can do. We've seen this. We've seen this on television in Laurel, Virginia, and in other communities around the state. We've seen it at some of the Center of the American Experiment get-togethers around the state of Minnesota. Parents are upset. There's a lot of energy out there. How can parents focus that energy on making a change here? I'll just throw this wide open. Let's go to you, Alfreda Baldwin. How can parents deal with this? You had a very direct way of dealing with this. You started a school.
Right.
But for all the rest of us, where do you start?
Well, I think, first of all, people have to be bold and courageous. We have to stop letting them define terms and use terms the way they were originally put into the dictionary. So this definition of racist is somebody who thinks that they are superior because of their race. That's flat out what it is. If that's not you, then you don't have a reason to apologize. And you tell people, I don't care what you say, that's not what I am.
As an English major, this whole rewriting the language thing resonates with me. I've done that one once before. It's like racism is about structures of power. Okay, maybe it is, but we used to have a perfectly good word for hating someone because of the color of their skin. If we need a new one, let's come up with one, but till further notice. So what else can parents do? Rebecca Hagstrom, you wanted to talk about this.
Well, I think that in addition to really understanding the language, I think parents have to organize. It's one thing to have one parent write their superintendent or write the equity counselor. It's another thing if 100 or 200 from the district are writing to that superintendent. And obviously running for school board is a great thing to try to do if you have the time and energy to do that. But even that is best done in groups of people rather than a single person, because one person is going to easily get outvoted. But I do believe that organizing is going to be one of the most effective ways. There's power in numbers. That's just the way it is. But they have to understand the language too. So when you get a group of people concerned, you need to teach them what the school district is probably going to say to them. They're going to say, oh, well, no, we're not doing critical race theory. We're just doing equity, or we're just teaching an honest view of history. But then they need to have the ability to push back on that and say, well, actually, I know that you're doing this, this, and this. And we see that as critical race theory. We see it as divisive and ununifying, and not be afraid to push back as a group.
Where do you learn that, though? There's a question, because my dad was a teacher. He taught education at the college level for a while. I'm a fairly well-read person. I went to a St. Paul school board meeting once, and I felt like I'd stepped into a Babylon Bee article come to life. Where do you learn this, Rebecca?
Well, I mean, it does take time to do research. I mean, obviously, listening to shows like this, there are podcasts out there, Education America. We've covered critical race theory many, many times. You can go back and listen to some of our old podcasts. I've actually had all of these panel members on my show. But research is important. And one of the things you can do that I think is really insightful for people is to go to some of the sources. So 1619 Project has curriculum. Black Lives Matter has curriculum. Zinn Education, Zinn Education has curriculum. And if you go in and start looking at what they think that they should be showing kids in school, parents will be appalled. I mean, the Zinn Education group, they're touting this wonderful exercise that teaches kids to go back and look at the Constitution and look at it as though the farmers were involved or the slaves were involved. And so basically the whole point is to disparage our Constitution. And they flat out say, if you ask kids to memorize the Declaration of Independence, for instance, or the Bill of Rights, you are actually indoctrinating them rather than teaching them how to think.
Zinn as in Howard Zinn?
Zinn.
Oof, yeah. Catherine Wigfall.
I would say efforts to push back really have to start at the grassroots level.
Yes.
This will not be an issue that is won at the state level or the federal level. It is really up to grassroots activism to push back on CRT and identity politics in general. So yes, run for school board if you can, attend school board meetings. And to your point about, well, where do parents start to learn how to do this? American Experiment is planning on hosting a campaign school, a one-day campaign school event for school board candidates so that they can learn about messaging for their campaign, how to strategize. And then we're also launching a microsite and app that will connect like-minded Minnesotans statewide and by district and provide resources for them on, well, what questions do I pose before a school board meeting? I've never spoken out at one before. How do I gather with others to attend a meeting or sign a petition and that sort of thing? And so we want to really equip Minnesotans not only with the knowledge on these issues, but also resources to get involved.
Elfrida Baldwin, you had something to add to this?
Yes, so under Minnesota law, parents are entitled, they have a right to see the curriculum that is being used in their child's school.
Ooh.
Groups of parents ought to be demanding to see the curriculum, the books, the syllabus, whatever their kids are being shown, so that they can read it for themselves and see what's in there.
At least make it a fair fight. Kendall Qualls, you have about 30 seconds here.
Yeah, and I'll say the last thing here. Got to remember we're Americans. We have choices in life. And if you don't like what your child is being taught, you adjust your life, make choices and make changes, and pull them out of that school. Period. And that's what we have to take a look at.
Been there, done that, although it wasn't over CRT. It was in the good old days when it was just about zero tolerance policies. But one thing I want to add to what in some respect all of you said is that get together in a groups. Anything to do with conservative politics tends to be so solitary, so lone wolfy, so on your own, tucked in your room, cranking away on social media. Make it a social activity. I found that was one of the best things about getting involved in this show and in my blog 15, 20 years ago was getting a social circle together around this, so you're not doing this all by yourself. People crave involvement and social involvement with other people, which, by the way, is one of the things that CRT is trying to destroy in people's lives here. So I want to make sure that we get people, if you're going to organize, make it a social activity. For crying out loud, have some fun doing it. I mean, you're only saving democracy. I mean, you might as well have fun doing it as well.
And Mitch, to that point, there's more of us than there are of them. There are many more people that agree with you.
The silent
That's out there.
majority.
They don't want you to think that, but by golly, it is true, and you can find that out. So it's not just schools where this is an issue. There's all of you in your real lives in the adult world are facing this as well, whether you know it or not. If you aren't now, you will soon. So let's talk about that when we come back. This is the CRT report card, AM 1280 The Patriot. Go nowhere. We'll be right back.
Congratulations to AM 1280, The Patriot, for providing 2 decades of intelligent talk.
Patriot traffic from the IneedMoreHair.com traffic center.
And the traffic center westbound side of 94 backing up at Huron at 35W, 35E to the tunnel at 20 minutes. Westbound 94 is 694 busy at Hemlock Lane to the Fish Lake interchange. Eastbound 94 disabled vehicle at Cedar. Construction causing a backup eastbound 94 at Snelling to Marion. The tunnel to 35E at a half hour. Eastbound 494 packed in at 169 to France. Highway 212 to 94, 694 at 40 minutes. On the eastbound side of 394, disabled vehicle at 169. Backing up eastbound 394 at Highway 100. Eastbound Crosstown delays at Gleason to Penn. And southbound 35W slowing at 11th Avenue.
More
I'm
of our
Dylan, that's
CRT
traffic.
report card special coming up here on AM 1280 The Patriot. Then back to the Larry Elder Show at 6. Our special CRT report card is supported by Education America, Save the Country, Save the Classroom, and Speaking Proudly Oratory Competition. Your forecast this evening, partly cloudy, low in the mid-60s. Nice Friday with partly cloudy skies and a high around 83. 20 years of intelligent radio for AM 1280 The Patriot.
AM 1280 The Patriot.
Whoa, look at all these options.
You could fill an entire warehouse with all the different ways you can stream The Patriot. Top shelf choices include AM1280thepatriot.com, our free app, and radio.com.
I felt like we could speak our minds and ideas freely and maybe even influence the opinions of listeners.
I met kids my age who share my interest in politics.
The whole experience was incredible. Speaking in the Capitol, I never thought I would do that.
These comments and others come from Minnesota high school girls who competed in the last Speaking Proudly oratory competition. Free speech deserves your help. It's time to cancel the cancel culture, which intimidates young people and stifles factual knowledge and creative thinking. Speaking Proudly encourages and inspires high school-age girls to develop their own opinions and present them clearly and convincingly. How can you help? Tell girls between 9th and 12th grade in your family, neighborhood, or classroom about Speaking Proudly and urge them to submit their application for consideration by September 11th by going to speakingproudly.org. There, they'll learn more about the process and the theme of this year's competition, October 23rd at the state capitol. Change the narrative by going to speakingproudly.org.
If you are like me, you are probably frustrated by how hard it is to get good, solid, daily Minnesota local news. The local news is dominated by far-left, agenda-driven corporate news sources that fail to cover important topics and don't give any voice to conservatives. Hi, this is Ed Morrissey of HotAir.com and a frequent host on AM 1280 The Patriot, and I have found a solution to this problem. Join me and over 100,000 Minnesota residents who read Alpha News daily. Alpha News does not run ads, nor do they have paywalls. They do provide breaking local news and insightful daily commentary. No wonder it's the fastest growing news source in Minnesota. Follow Alpha News on Facebook or follow them on Twitter at AlphaNewsMN. I enjoy their daily newsletters and exclusive interviews with top decision makers. Make sure you and all of your friends are informed before Election Day. Read Alpha News at alphanewsmn.com. That's alphanewsmn.com, and tell your friends.
Want to enroll your child in Christian school this fall for half the cost? TwinCitiesTuitions.com is joined with area private schools to offer half-off tuition for your child's first year. At TwinCitiesTuitions.com, you'll see our partnering schools, an interactive map to find one in your area, and frequently asked questions about the program. Now more than ever, it's important for your child to have a biblical worldview. Get details about the half-off Christian tuition program at TwinCitiesTuitions.com. That's TwinCitiesTuitions.com.
Hey, congrats to AM 1280 The Patriot for providing 2 decades of intelligent talk. AM 1280 The Patriot, you are listening to the CRT Report Card Special. Have no fear, Carl Jackson will be back tomorrow as we count down towards, fingers crossed here, Governor Larry Elder. Hey, a guy can dream. If you're not an optimist, why be a conservative in St. Paul, speaking for myself? This is the CRT Report Card Special. We are talking with Rebecca Hagstrom from Education America. We are talking from Katrin Wigfall of the Center of the American Experiment. Of course, Kendall Qualls and Alfreda Baldwin from Take Action. Take Charge, rather. No, Take Action is another whole thing. Take Charge, thank you very much, among many other things. So we've been talking about the imperative for parents to get involved in their school boards as long as you're in a district that can be saved. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But CRT doesn't just affect school kids. I mean, there's certainly an imperative to indoctrinate the next generation at work here, and they're going to it hammer and tongs. But just because you're out of high school doesn't mean you've escaped. We've all talked, I certainly, working in the world of tech, work with a fair number of people who have worked with companies that have gone woke, that have gone CRT, that have gone squishy. And we're not just talking Google and Facebook and Amazon here. We're talking a whole lot of work-a-daddy, hug-a-mommy technology companies. Let's talk about what adults can do to push back against this culture in their daily lives. Kendall Qualls, Take Charge, certainly has its goals cut out for it with saving the family, regardless of education here. Tell us a little bit about your perspective on pushing back against CRT in adult life.
Yeah, it's tough because at the end of the day, you have to earn a living, right?
Oh, yeah.
And do you get to the point where you're offending your boss, your colleagues, that type of thing? But at the end of the day, you have rights that from a civil rights standpoint. And so, I would, before anyone says anything, I always make sure, hey, look, consult a lawyer, consult an employment lawyer so you know what your rights are before you say or do anything that gets you in trouble. But at the end of the day, we're Americans. We're not defined by our skin color. And I tell people to always align themselves with Martin Luther King's statement. We want to judge each other by the character of who we are, not the skin color. And then throw that back out at the CRT proponents. They say, was Martin Luther King wrong? And then let them answer that question. Stop there.
I would love to see them try. Katrin Wigfall.
I think for employees who are struggling with this in the workforce, it's important to know who is on their side. And American Experiment partners with the Upper Midwest Law Center, and they have filed suits recently against employers for discriminatory practices, for civil rights violations. And so I think it's important for employees to know they're not alone and that there are people on their side fighting for them and that they can reach out for help and support.
Mm-hmm.
So, Alfreda Baldwin, your perspective on dealing with this as an adult in your adult and vocational life. You certainly have worked. You've worked in the financial services industry. I think it's fair to say you've seen the nascency of this idea in corporate life. Your advice to adults as they look at CRT in their as they earn their living.
Well, thank God I retired in 2013. And so the world had not gone fully woke before I retired. But what I would say to people, they were starting to talk about we got to have more diversity in our hiring. And I would just say, where are these people going to come from if they're not being educated and they're not being expected to know how to read and write and do math and be on time? So you've got to recognize that you've got a disconnect going on here, and you need to fix that.
Yeah, absolutely. Rebecca Hagstrom.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I know from a lot of the parents at our school work at some of the big corporations, and they're getting critical race theory type training on a regular basis at their workplaces. And they're feeling frustrated. Like, what am I supposed to do about this? And I do think that there is a place to be able to ask about having other types of curriculum. I know that the FAIR group, they just started in January also, Foundation Against Intolerance and Racism. They are coming up with curriculum not just for public schools to push back against critical race theory, but also for the workplace. So I would encourage people to go to their website. I don't know it off the top of my head, but it's FAIR, Foundation Against Intolerance and Racism. And they do have a local chapter here in Minnesota that's just getting started.
The great Glenn Reynolds, the godfather of conservative blogging and my blog father, put it well. It's like when the cancel mob comes for you in your adult life, 3 steps. Number 1, don't apologize. I mean, assuming you're thinking straight, don't apologize. Number 2, organize. Get together with other people of like mind. 3, punch back, which is where some of our friends at the Upper Midwest Law Center can help with that. Not literally, no, figuratively. This is the CRT report card, AM 1280 The Patriot. We'll be right back.
AM 1280 The Patriot.
Do you want to fight back and win against Minneapolis police defunding, against Attorney General Ellison deputizing outside climate warrior lawyers, and against Governor Walz punishing churches in his COVID shutdown orders? The Upper Midwest Law Center has fought and won these legal cases. Join them to help defend these victories and win against critical race theory in schools and employment. Learn more and make a tax-deductible donation to the Upper Midwest Law Center at umwlc.org. Join the fight.
Take your favorite Patriot hosts with you wherever you go by downloading our app. Listen to your favorite shows, see our social media posts, enter exclusive contests, and more. Just search for AM 1280 The Patriot in the App Store.
Cool voiceover. Zany sound effect.
We were gonna write a flashy promo about streaming us at radio.com, but considering how easy it is to do, we'll keep it simple too. Listen to The Patriot on the free radio.com app.
Congrats to AM 1280 The Patriot for providing 2 decades of intelligent talk.
Patriot Traffic from the IneedMoreHair.com Traffic Center.
In the traffic center, eastbound 494 busy at 169 to France. Highway 212 to 94, 694 at 45 minutes. Eastbound 394 from 494 to downtown Minneapolis at 15. Eastbound Crosstown slowing at Gleason to Penn from 494 to 35W taking 20 minutes. Southbound 35W busy at 11th Avenue. Northbound 35E slowing at Highway 13 to St. Clair. Burnsville split to downtown St. Paul at a half hour. On the southbound side of 35E, pockets of heavy traffic beginning at Kellogg to Shepherd. Downtown St. Paul to the Burnsville split at 25 minutes. Eastbound Highway 36 hanging up at 35W. Delays westbound 94 at Huron.
Congratulations to AM 1280, The Patriot, for providing 2 decades of intelligent talk.
We've got a country to save. I'm sorry, I can't resist it. I am not, in fact, Carl Jackson. I am Mitch Berg, normally heard Saturdays from 1 to 3 on AM 1280 The Patriot, the Northern Alliance Radio Network. However, I am here today as part of the CRT, that's Critical Race Theory Report Card Special, which, happy to say, Alpha News, Education America, speaking proudly, and Upper Midwest Law Center helping to bring to you today. Of course, we're here with a panel of guests who have brought a wealth of knowledge on the subject. Katherine Wigfall from the Center of the American Experiment, Rebecca Hagstrom from Liberty Classical Academy, and of course, co-host of Educating America here on Education, which is every Saturday here on AM 1280 The Patriot, right after my own broadcast, and of course, Kendall Qualls and Elfrida Baldwin from Take Charge. Not Action. Wrong organization entirely. Take Charge. Spirit, entirely different place here. So let's talk. I mean, you put it well during the break, Kendall Qualls. Necessity is the mother of invention. We have a necessity. We've had a number of suggestions for working within and changing the system. And of course, trying to get the wheel to turn as the wheel does in American society. But sometimes invention is called for. Sometimes changing the system more or less radically. Elfrida Baldwin, you have done this yourself. You are in the process of starting a school. Let's talk about parents and other people's options for changing the system for themselves and for their kids as things develop here.
Well, I think we have to understand that the public school system and the teachers union think that the kids belong to them.
Yeah.
So it is time for parents to take back their God-given job.
Absolutely.
To teach their kids. Private school, homeschool. I'm going to call on the churches to get back in the education game and make it possible for our children to be educated in a school that really does educate them instead of indoctrinate.
And for people of a certain age, I mean, I know people my age not that long ago saying, I prefer to let the experts do that job with my kids. It's like they're not the experts anymore. They are agents of an ideology, not the experts on teaching your kids how to be the best them that they can be. And people are getting this now. I mean, people saw during COVID, during the lockdowns, what the schools were teaching their kids, and they responded by pulling out in droves. And they were already pulling out of the public school systems over the last 20 years. It's been a crisis, and the snowball just keeps rolling. And certainly you are a symptom of that yourself, Elfrida Baldwin.
Exactly, and I'm actually have joined with a group of 4 other moms. We've started the Exodus Minnesota. Our website is theexodusmn.org, and we have on our page a list of other school options for the fall. We're just trying to spearhead a movement away from the public school system.
Kendall Qualls, of course, you are heavily involved in trying to evolve our society in a much more productive direction. How can people do that?
Yeah, again, it's unifying Americans around our shared values, shared history. Guess what? America does work. In fact, when you look at Defense Department schools, these are schools overseas that educate a very diverse population of kids.
Yep.
Those kids do well. They have discipline in the schools. They have expectation in the schools. They don't have this wokeism going on. It's a very different outcome for those children. Now, when I say that when we take a look at the different options, that's the nature of American who we are. If we don't like the monopoly that we're giving, getting shoved down our throats, Americans come up with different options. We're just innovative in that perspective. And I say to people all the time, look, you can continue working for Blockbuster or Kodak, or continue going there, or you can come up with a different concept. And Americans are coming up with those different concepts all the time.
As long as we have an intellectual free market out there, people will find a way to fill it. Now, of course, people want to stifle that, but Katrin Wigfall, of course, for the Center of the American Experiment, that the American Experiment is about this exact spirit of invention. So what do you advocate?
Absolutely. I just would echo what Elfrida says, too, just about the power of parents seeking out alternative learning environments.
Oh, yeah.
Our public schools will not get better until they're forced to get better. And competition helps with that. And parents voting with their feet will put that pressure on public schools. And pressure comes in a variety of ways. One of those ways is changing learning environments completely. And I'll say, too, for parents who are maybe interested in homeschooling but aren't sure if they themselves can do it, you don't have to quit your job full time. There are so many wonderful homeschool co-ops out there as well that connect families with each other, that hire teachers. So if you can't afford private school tuition, or you're tired of being on a charter school waiting list, there are other options out there. Homeschooling, Elfrida's micro school is another great example. So yes, parents need to get informed and realize they don't have to settle for a mediocre education for their child.
It might be a wonderful time to be a, dare I say, a freelance teacher, something that would have stuck in my dad's cross affairs. Rebecca Hagstrom, you, of course, have taken a very direct approach to this, not only starting a school, but starting a talk show, being one of those flaming foul-mouthed conservative talk show. Oh, wait.
I don't think I'm too foul-mouthed.
No, not too bad.
Foul-mouthed. No, I was just going to, I reiterate everything that the rest of the panel is saying. I think it's really important at a time like this for parents to really stop and pay attention to what's happening. I understand busy families. I had 4 boys, so I know sports are important to people, and people might be reluctant to vote with their feet, as we've been talking about, because of sports. But I would encourage parents to really look into the private school options. Most private schools have sports opportunities. They have scholarships for if they struggle to pay the tuition. They have arts programs, drama programs. So they might be surprised at how much they can get in. And then if that's not an option for them, pods are another new thing that are popping up where a group of families will come together. It's kind of similar to a micro school, really. But where they might just hire a freelance teacher to teach, 3 neighborhood kids. And they pool their money together, and it provides a great option for the kids.
I made up that term, but by golly, I think I'm going to run with that. And by the way, that's one of the things that's given me hope through this whole issue is that when I was heavily involved as a charter school activist a few years ago, when I put my kids in them, noticing what an incredible percentage of my fellow charter school parents at that time were immigrants, African-American, Latino, Asian, people who were tired, even then, 15 years ago almost, of the indoctrination their kids were getting back when CRT still meant cathode ray tube to most of us here. We're going to have time for one more segment here, wrap things up, and give everyone some calls to action when we come back. This is the CRT Report Card Special, AM 1280, The Patriot, brought to you by Alpha News, Education America, Speaking Proudly, and the Upper Midwest Law Center. Go nowhere. We'll be right back.
AM 1280, The Patriot.
Politics and education. It's often easier to learn what people are against than what they're for. People don't speak up for good ideas anymore. They just attack their own idea of bad ones. At Education America, we think there's a better conversation to be had, and it's a conversation about what we're for. Abraham Lincoln famously said, "The philosophy of the schoolroom in one generation will be the philosophy of government in the next." If we can ask the right questions and awaken the world around us to the truths that can shape a nation, we can see Lincoln's words come to life in amazing ways. Join my co-host Rebecca Hagstrom and myself, Mark Durkin, on Education America, Saturdays at 6 p.m. on AM 1280 The Patriot. And visit SaveTheClassroom.com for podcasts, past episodes, and other resources. Tune in on Saturdays at 6 p.m. on AM 1280 The Patriot. That's SaveTheClassroom.com. Education America, save the classroom, save the country.
Are you the principal or leader of a Christian or Catholic school? Would you like to fill the empty seats in your classrooms for no cash out of pocket? TwinCitiesTuitions.com would like to team up with you on our tuition program for first-year students. You'll be part of a marketing campaign to raise awareness about your school and gain new students for next year and beyond. Again, at no cash investment for your school. Get details by logging on to TwinCitiesTuitions.com. That's TwinCitiesTuitions.com.
Do you want to fight back and win against Minneapolis police defunding, against Attorney General Ellison deputizing outside climate warrior lawyers, and against Governor Walz punishing churches in his COVID shutdown orders? The Upper Midwest Law Center has fought and won these legal cases. Join them to help defend these victories and win against critical race theory in schools and employment. Learn more and make a tax-deductible donation to the Upper Midwest Law Center at umwlc.org. Join the fight.
It's Brad Carlson from the Northern Alliance Radio Network. Happy 20th anniversary, AM 1280 The Patriot.
I know, yes.
AM 1280 The Patriot. No, not the Northern Alliance. That's Saturday from 1 to 3. I am Mitch Berg. Don't forget, Carl Jackson will be back filling in for the Sage from South Central tomorrow at his usual time. But we are just wrapping up what I knew was going to be not nearly enough time to talk about this entire issue, the CRT report card special. What I want to do is just go around the table and just get your last calls to action for people, the information they need, the actions they need to take, the thoughts you want to leave them with. I'll start with you, Rebecca Hagstrom.
Yeah, it's hard to summarize, but I would say the number one thing parents need to do is to start researching and finding out what is happening in their child's district and consider, if they know that this is happening, and it is happening in most districts, consider leaving the district and finding an alternative for their children. And then you can still fight those battles. You can still get involved at the local level, but protect your children first and then start fighting those battles.
Absolutely. Katrin Wigfall from the Center of the American Experiment.
I would say parents check out our RaiseOurStandardsMN.com page. That page was dedicated to our tour. We'll have a list of action items that parents can choose from. Everything from get involved in the social studies standards revision process that's going on. We didn't even touch on that. Run for school board, review textbooks, review curriculum, request public data. And so they can find the list there, and they can also email me directly. My email is on americanexperiment.org, and I'd be happy to follow up on this list of action items.
That's Katrin Wigfall, conventional spelling. So, Kendall Qualls, your advice, final advice for the listener.
Sure. As you think about this fall and sending your kids to school, I just want you to understand the public schools that we went to, these are not the same schools. They have the same names, but they're not the same schools. And think about it when you're sending your children, you want the best exposure for them to prepare for a future that encourages them and aligns with your values. You need to seriously consider looking at another venue if they're not going to adhere to what you want as a parent.
Absolutely. Alfreda Baldwin.
And if you want other options, check out the ExodusMN.org. And don't let anybody define who you are, either as a oppressor or the oppressed.
Yep.
You know who you are. Stand strong, be bold, and just refuse to accept this nonsense they're pushing on us.
Absolutely. Don't let people define who you are and what you think. That's the term for that is gaslighting. It's abusive behavior, and we don't tolerate that. We can't tolerate that. Our society deserves better. My pleasure talking with all of you for the last couple hours here. Yeah. Rebecca Hagstrom, Katrin Wigfall, Kendall Qualls, and Alfreda Baldwin. A pleasure talking with you all. Let's all do this again. You're all welcome on my show anytime there's something to talk talk about tours, schools, take charge.
Wonderful.
Oh, whatever, absolutely. Of course, a special thanks to our sponsors, Alpha News, Education America, saving the classroom and the country. Speaking Proudly, the oratory competition. I'm looking forward to being there. And the Upper Midwest Law Center. For the entire crew here at AM 1280 The Patriot, Lee Michaels, the consigliere, John Berg, and the whole crew, I am Mitch Berg. Thank you for stopping by. See you next time. God bless you all. God bless America.
AM 1280 The Patriot.
If you are like me, you are probably frustrated by how hard it is to get good, solid, daily Minnesota local news. The local news is dominated by far-left, agenda-driven corporate news sources that fail to cover important topics and don't give any voice to conservatives. Hi, this is Ed Morrissey of HotAir.com and a frequent host on AM 1280 The Patriot, and I have found a solution to this problem. Join me and over 100,000 Minnesota residents who read Alpha News daily. Alpha News does not run ads, nor do they